Welcome to Open Minds Radio with Alejandro Rojas. Open Minds Radio is your UFO news authority, presenting evidence and the latest news regarding the UFO phenomenon. Here's your host, Alejandro Rojas.
Hello, it's Alejandro Rojas with Open Minds Radio, your UFO news authority, and today we have a superb show. Chose the word superb today because it's great. We've got Don Schmitt. You may have remembered we had him over a year ago, and I barely remember it because I was really sick, and I felt like I was babbling the whole time, but I listened to it and I didn't do as bad as I thought. I could tell in my voice and I could see myself kind of being out of it, but I wasn't so much. And also, I should point out for those of watching, you may notice that we already have Jason on the set. There were a lot of women who emailed us that said you need to have Jason on longer, and they wanted to take a look at him for a longer period on the show, including the Raiders cheerleaders. So we said, okay, how can you tell the Raiders cheerleaders no? So now they can see Jason longer. Don Schmitt, though, we're going to have on the show, like I mentioned earlier. Some of the things, he told us a little bit about this, but how his mentor was J. Allen Hynek, who was an astronomer who helped with Close Encounters. He was an advisor for that movie, and he had a little cameo appearance in there. And so he's been in this for a long time. He was a Roswell skeptic, but then, started researching Roswell, and to his surprise, he just found tons and tons of witnesses, and he became one of the main Roswell researchers. He wrote a book in 1990 and then also helped with Paul David's movie, which I'm always raving about, the Roswell movie for Showtime, which you can read about, all of this, in the latest issue of Open Minds magazine, which should be on the shelves at the largest bookstores in the United States of America, which is like the big cheese, the U.S. So that's a big deal. That's pretty cool. So go check that out. We're also going to talk about some things you might not have heard about, such as Louis Farrakhan had a UFO conference. He had a UFO portion at a recent conference, and it was going the same time as the UFO Congress, which we held. And Don went back and forth to attend both. So he's going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some other conferences and things that have happened in the area, including a conference that Antonio Huneeus and Michael Schratt will be speaking at, which is in Kingman, Arizona. It's the first annual Kingman Conference, and that's May 6th through the 9th this weekend. The website is ArizonaUFOsightings.com if you want to look up more. Don and I will talk about that, and I will repeat that URL again later. So have your pens and pencils ready. If you need, again, that's ArizonaUFOsightings.com. Also, don't forget, we are social, online, virtual social butterflies. We have Facebook. We've got several Facebooks out there. We have the one for the radio show, which is full. So if you're kind of upset because you're trying to be our friend on the Open Minds Radio Facebook, it's because we did it as like a person. And so we're already past our 5,000 limit, and they only let us have 5,000 friends. Friendship is limitless. They shouldn't do that, but they do. So we have another one for Open Minds Magazine. You can go there. You can also find Jason and Maureen at Jason Open Minds. And he put Jason Open Minds, same with Maureen Open Minds. That's not their real last name. The company's not named after them. That is just what they put for their Open Minds persona. So you can go friend them and communicate to them that way. Also, we have Open Minds Twitter, and we have Paranormal RPTR, Paranormal Reporter Twitter. That's me. So that's my personal Twitter, Paranormal RPTR, where we put up, all of our cool stories and everything. Some of the cool stories we put up on a nearly daily basis are UFO headlines from around the world, because there's lots going on when it comes to UFOs. on a weekly basis, and it's just mind-boggling. And to help us out with that, we bring in our news correspondent, Jason McClellan. Jason, why don't you tell us about the latest UFO news, buddy?
Greetings, Alejandro, and hello, everyone. This is your Open Minds News Brief for Monday, May 2nd, 2011. The Sun published an article last week about Hitler's plan to build a fleet of UFOs during World War II. This article points to evidence to suggest an SS officer by the name of Hans Kammler achieved significant breakthroughs in anti-gravity technology toward the end of the war, which supposedly led to UFO development projects. The Sun's article references the German magazine PM, which published a report last year professing to have strong evidence supporting the claim of an advanced Nazi UFO program. The magazine reportedly quoted witnesses who saw a flying saucer marked with a German Iron Cross flying low over the Thames in 1944. According to The Sun, Joseph Andreas Epp, an engineer who served as a consultant to a Nazi UFO project, claimed 15 prototypes were built. But Martin Stade, who is an author of a book on an area where UFO projects supposedly took place, claims 174 flying saucers were developed at the site.
Wow.
That's kind of crazy. And this is, for UFO researchers, and of course you and I, this isn't new news. This is information that's been out, and our own Michael Schratt has talked about the Nazi involvement with UFO research. Mm-hmm. But the Sun and some other media outlets have done stories on this lately, and I suspect it's due to, and we've talked about it on the show, and we've certainly mentioned it on openminds.tv, our website, but there's a movie coming out next year called Iron Sky. Supposedly. They've been working on it forever. But it is a comedy, and supposedly the premise of the movie is that the Nazis, after World War II, sent UFOs to the moon to develop a base there so they could get ready to attack us from the moon.
Well, and sure enough, the Sun is always bombastic and sensationalistic. Antonio actually went and looked at that story on the German magazine. He says they don't have strong evidence at all. They take a skeptical standpoint and they discuss the issue, but they do not personally purport to have strong evidence to show this. So the Sun definitely blew that out of proportion, which is nothing new for the Sun. Well,
and a lot of that particular article was also sort of pushing the guy's book that what was his name? Martin Stade, who has a book about the UFO projects, the Nazi UFO projects.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like they were working on stuff. I don't know if they actually built something. Built something. I said belt because I was thinking of the Bell.
The Bell. There you go.
That's what I'm saying. And because the Bell Project is the one that Michael talked about, which is one project which they possibly did really build.
Yeah, he actually talked about that on UFO Hunters as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Way to go, Michael.
Yep. In other news, a new book about the search for extraterrestrial life was released last month by Washington Post staff writer Mark Kaufman. Kaufman explains on his website, Habitable Zones, scientists by the thousands around the world are engaged in a broad and increasingly successful search for the origins of life on Earth and for traces of life elsewhere in our universe. My book seeks to bring to life the science and some of the scientists at the center of the effort. A Washington Post colleague, Joel Achenbach, recently interviewed Kaufman about his new book, titled First Contact: Scientific Breakthroughs in the Hunt for Life Beyond Earth. In the interview, Kaufman briefly discusses SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, stating that he has, quote, never been a fan or even particularly knowledgeable person about SETI. He explains that after walking through a SETI telescope array, he came to the conclusion that, quote, if we're in fact interested in trying to learn whether technologically evolved life exists out there, we don't have many alternatives to SETI's current approach. However, he still feels that the SETI approach to searching for extraterrestrial life is, quote, mostly a crapshoot. SETI made headlines last week following the announcement that due to budgetary cutbacks, the Institute was forced to suspend operations at their Allen Telescope Array. Kaufman's book, First Contact: Scientific Breakthroughs in the Hunt for Life Beyond Earth, was published by Simon & Schuster and is in stores now.
Great. Yeah, sounds interesting.
It sounds like an
Another
interesting read.
astrobiological
A
book.
lot of these astrobiology books coming out, written by these astrobiologists, kind of vague on the ET subject. You know, they definitely like to have it in the title and mention it because it's sexy and it creates a lot of interest.
Yeah.
But many of them, their point is that they feel strongly about microbes and things out there, and that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many right now possibilities that are presenting themselves that a lot of people are taking different kind of approaches, but usually around the
But this book, I like the sound of it because it sounds like just an overview, a general overview of the players right now, the astrobiologists out there, and what each of them is doing, the approaches they're taking.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
So that sounds like a better approach, because I know you and I every week we talk about these different astrobiologists and different scientists with these far out theories.
Yeah.
You know, crazy statements. They're just these leaps they're making, all for the sake of authoring a paper, and that's pretty much it. They're kind of far out there with no basis.
Right.
This, however, seems a little more safe because it's just an overview of what others are doing.
Yeah, more journalistic
Right,
to give
exactly.
you an idea of what's going on.
And that's the thing. I don't believe this guy is a scientist. He is a writer.
Right.
That's what
yeah.
he is. So
Right.
he's a journalist, and I think that's the approach of his book, and I think it's a good way to go.
Way to go, buddy.
Oh, yeah. Well, on April 21st, the National Security Agency posted documents from their technical journal, and in these documents were actually some articles about extraterrestrials. One of these articles was titled Key to the Extraterrestrial Messages, which led some to assume that these documents were pertaining to messages received from extraterrestrials, when in fact these documents were actually related to exercises the NSA conducted for practicing deciphering coded messages that extraterrestrials may send us in the future. And Alejandro, you wrote an interesting article about this on our website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of confusion there. And I go back because if you're like, hey, man, you know, those documents were called extraterrestrial messages. How can they be just exercises? But if you go read our story, I show you exactly how, because it is very evident when you look at the introduction of these articles. And they all stem back to one particular article by a gentleman named Calamejos, who was a cryptologist, a famous cryptologist for the NSA. And he started off with this document about the beginning of when they were thinking about doing SETI type stuff. He talked about Frank Drake and his stuff, and this was in the late 60s, and it was all brand new then. And it was kind of funny because he has this passage in there about how some of these scientists are, because of Frank Drake and other people's work, because there were other people doing this stuff, trying to figure out how many extraterrestrial civilizations there are out there, and they figured probably a lot. But they started to bat around the idea of listening to signals, to listen to extraterrestrials. But it's kind of funny because in this article, this NSA article that Calamejos wrote, he even wrote how the issue is that we have a little bit of knowledge about a certain type of technology, but there's a huge array of possible technology that may be used for communication across the stars, and we only know a fraction. We've only mastered a fraction, so it's probably might not be the best way, because if they're using any of these myriad of other technologies that we're aware of, let alone technologies we're not aware of, it might not be the best approach. And that's the thing, is that we're listening, you know, using our radios and stuff. You know, what's to say they wouldn't fly over and just use a regular radio line or television signal with a probe or something? I mean, if they want to get a message to us, they're going to get a message to us. Not only that, he pointed out the difference that even if this civilization is 50 years more technical than we are, think of where we were 50 years ago. That's a huge difference, let alone if they're 500, 5,000 or anything like that. So it's kind of cool, some of the things he talks about. It's an interesting read, and it's a short document. And then he gets into some exercises, because he was a teacher, on how to decipher extraterrestrial messages, and he proposes some exercises. And then other people did, and that's what people thought were these extraterrestrial documents. But he does have another one out there called UFO Hypothesis, where he argues why it's really important, given the UFO sightings that they're having and the credible people that are having them, when he wrote this document in the late 60s, why it's real important that science and the NSA take UFOs and extraterrestrial visitation seriously. He was really into the topic, and he was one of the founding fathers of cryptology in the NSA. So
I'm glad you wrote the article on it, because you're absolutely right. There was definitely a story there. It's not the story that some people were running with, but
it's not disclosure like some people thought it might be, which but it is still some really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And I know you actively search on Twitter for extraterrestrial messages.
Yeah. And I found, in fact, the majority of messages are difficult to decipher and may be extraterrestrial in origin.
That's right.
I can't prove otherwise.
So lots of strange stuff on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well, Alejandro, I know you and I are big fans of the moon. We both really want to go to the moon. Well,
the moon rocks.
Every week, we seem to get more options. This one gets us a little closer. It doesn't quite get us to the moon. But Space Adventures, a private space exploration company, recently announced plans to offer trips around the moon to space tourists. Passengers willing to pay the $150 million ticket price would launch into space aboard a 3-seat spacecraft. Upon reaching space, the craft would rendezvous with a waiting unmanned rocket that would take the spacecraft the rest of the way to the moon, where the moon would be circled at an altitude of 62 miles. According to Popular Science, Space Adventures expects to begin launching their trips around the moon within the next 5 years.
Wow.
Right around the corner.
Within 5 years. How cool is that?
Well, and hopefully another 5 years after that, the price will drop dramatically, and then we can afford it.
Yeah, $50 special.
$50.
That's what I'm waiting for. Southwest,
Southwest, you can get the companion airfare.
Yeah, companion airfare, or, think of the miles you're racking up.
There you go.
Holy
Frequent
cow.
flyers, yeah.
You're going around the moon.
It's excellent.
That would be so awesome. That's amazing. And what if, the privatization of space travel actually makes things move quicker? We haven't seen evidence of that yet. We've got lots of plans and ideas, but NASA, of course, was pretty stagnant for a long period of time. Now NASA's going to go back to the moon, but they're using technology very similar to what they used to go to the moon in the first place. So they've kind of taken a step back. So I'm just very excited to see all this.
It's very exciting. You and I talk about this all the time. It's great. I think with all these private companies taking the lead and doing all this research, developing new technology, it's going to open lots of doors.
Yeah, it's cool, fly around the dark side, and maybe we will find their civilizations there. We can wave. Look at the aliens.
Oh, yeah. I want to see the dark side of the moon.
Yeah.
Not the fake one they portray in the next Transformers movie.
Oh, yeah.
But the actual dark
scary.
side of the moon. So. Mysterious lights over Lake Erie aren't uncommon, but a resident of Ohio recently captured some strange lights on video over the lake near his home in Eastlake. The witness, Michael Lee Hill, told Cleveland Fox affiliate Fox 8 that his video provides the first clear images of these lights. The video shows multiple lights over Lake Erie. The lights vary in color and may or may not be flashing or blinking. At times, the lights appear to hover, motionless in the sky, while at other times, the lights appear to slowly move through the sky in different directions. Hill says he has been filming Lake Erie UFOs for a long time. According to Fox 8, a group that previously researched the strange lights over Lake Erie concluded that they were airplanes. Additionally, officials at nearby Hopkins International Airport told Fox 8 that planes from the U.S. and Canada frequently take off and land over the water. Hill disagrees with the airplane conclusion and points to his latest video as evidence. And it's interesting because after Fox reported this story, the U.S. Coast Guard contacted the Canadian Coast Guard, and the Canadian Coast Guard came back with a response saying that only at certain times of day and in just the right light, people from the U.S. can see these lights in Canada, and they're from radio towers or windmills, which is an odd explanation for these lights, because if you watch the video, they are pretty high in the sky, too high for a radio tower or a windmill.
Yeah, the video, there was a still from the video on the video if people are watching the show via video. If you're not, remember, go to openminds.tv. You can see all of these stories, and there's links to the video. But you're right. I mean, I remember it was MUFON. There was a big craze that there were UFOs over Erie. People were going there every night and saying you could see them every night. And what MUFON was saying is that the majority of what people were seeing were planes, because there's lots of planes flying over Lake Erie. And I think they were right for those people saying they're coming every night. And they didn't say for sure this is the answer for everything. And plus, they didn't look at this guy's video. This guy only just released his video this week, even though he's been getting them for a while. So I don't know. His video does look a little different. It does look like some lights maybe staying still for a period of time. But, of course, if a plane is flying towards you over a lake, it's not going to show much of a change.
Right.
Especially if cloudy conditions like they were. They have their lights on in the cloud. So it's hard to say. You'd have to see more video and see, the times of days and stuff like that. I know the MUFON guys were able to get the schedules for the planes and show that, some of these videos were taken exactly when the planes were in the area. So I think, it sounds like, because I've seen other video that's really weird, that possibly something strange is going on over Lake Erie, because I don't think you could fool everybody. I think there's a lot of discerning people out there looking at these lights who are like, wow, I really don't think they would be happy if they could explain these things as planes. But like you said, a lot of those lights are so high in the air. Planes, commercial jets, 10,000 feet in the air makes sense. But a tower on the ground?
Kind of a ridiculous explanation.
At least for that video. That video obviously is not towers on the ground. I mean, the lights are too high in the sky.
Right. And even in this video, some of the lights could be planes and some could be unknown, because some appear to have different behavior.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of people who witness these lights on the lakes, and they say, we've lived here all our lives. We see the airplane traffic all the time. We know the difference between airplane traffic and these strange lights.
Right.
So, something strange going on.
Yeah. Something eerie over Lake Erie.
I'm sure that headline has been used.
Yeah, I've read it.
But
they use the Erie thing all the time.
I'll give you the credit.
Eerie lights over Lake Erie.
Yeah. Let's talk about crop circles. A crop circle was discovered a couple weeks ago in a field of oilseed rape near Chepstow in South Wales. The design had a diameter of 220 feet. The farmer who owns the field is unhappy about the crop circle, however, and claims the damage to his crops is going to cost him more than $1,000 in lost crops. In response to the crop circle, this farmer has apparently installed surveillance cameras in the field to catch any crop circle makers in the act. He means business. He's serious.
Well, you remember in Aliens where they had those movement detector laser cannons?
Right.
Photon. I wonder if they mounted some of those babies out there, what would happen?
Entertainment?
Yeah, well, they might be able to, if crop circles were made, even with those laser guns, that would prove there's something crazy going on.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's cool this guy has his camera set up, and it's unfortunate that more of the farmers don't have them, because they would catch something interesting on camera.
If everybody did, they would catch some hoaxers, because there's definitely people hoaxing, but they may catch some more orbs, because people have caught, there's a real famous one that's fake, but people have caught a lot of very interesting orb videos in that area. And I think, I don't know if I talked about this last week, and we're going to have Nancy Talbot on in a couple of weeks, but there's some new crop circles in Holland.
I don't believe you talked about it last week.
Yeah, and she was able to demonstrate that there was some actual burning in a crop circle, because she says people have claimed there's burning in crop circles, but every case that she's seen, it's turned out to be a type of moss that is black and not actual burning. But in this case, they were able to show that there was actual burning in the crop circles. So that's an interesting one. And these Holland crop circles having to do with Robert Vandenbroek, who we'll have on, we'll talk about the details, but they're getting more elaborate and very interesting.
And extraterrestrials, I don't know if they don't know or they don't care, but it's kind of unfair to these farmers to destroy their crops.
Yeah, but what they're doing could be more important if they're interdimensional, whatever they are, whatever's going on. And plus, it's not our crops. I doubt they see the world as, I doubt they honor deeds and property agreements. They probably think, hey, this crop's mine too, buddy.
Yeah, but that guy's the one who has to pay the bills.
Could be like a message, I love you message. And he's like, but Mr. Farmer, I love you.
That'd be awesome, but they need to give us the code to decipher.
Yeah, I know.
Then it would be okay. You'd go, oh, they love me.
Yep.
It's okay. I don't care about that $1,000.
Yeah, pounds.
No, it was 600 pounds, I believe.
Oh, okay.
I converted it.
Oh, okay.
One last bit of news here. The Roswell UFO Museum plans to build a new home for the museum, and their plan hit a snag last week. A paperwork error has been cited for the reason for the delay, but the museum's board of directors plans to reevaluate things after the upcoming annual Roswell UFO Festival in July. A reported 12,000 people visit the Roswell UFO Museum every month. Lots of people.
Yeah, lots of people, and hopefully we're going to be manning a table there during the Roswell Festival from the 1st to the 4th. Don Schmitt will be there to sign his story in our magazine, by our magazine. He wrote a story in there, sign it. Stan Friedman wrote a story. He can sign it for you there at the museum. And you are just going to be you're going to be sitting real pretty at that point.
Excellent.
Yep.
Alejandro, that is it for the news.
All right. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Adios, muchacho.
Adios.
All right. So some cool stuff. Jason already mentioned our NSA story, which was really fun because we've got a lot of great responses from that. And even some of the people who had reported the story first thinking that it was a real extraterrestrial message came over and said, hey, thanks, man, for clearing that up. And we're really cool about it. So we thank our UFO colleagues and for their enthusiasm and for their thanks. Another story clearing up some misinformation is the way I'll put it, and innocently so, I think. Just sometimes people, it takes a lot of research to get all the details right. And Antonio has been writing stories on the royals and UFOs just in time for the wedding. So this is kind of cool. He wrote a story about Lord Mountbatten, who is actually Prince Philip's uncle. So that would be Prince William's great uncle, who was into UFOs, and he researched UFOs. And there was one case where a UFO, according to someone who worked at his estate, landed on his estate and a creature came out. So Lord Mountbatten looked into that. He interviewed the witness and others who were around to see the witnesses' reactions and went out to go look at the area and stuff like that. And this was supposedly someone that Lord Mountbatten really trusted. And what's neat, of course, is a great uncle of, Prince William, is going to be a bigwig. These are people who are, high rollers. They're high. They're officers in the Navy and everything. So, these are very well-to-do, credible people. So it's kind of cool. So it's a two-parter. This first part is all about the landing that happened at Broadlands Estate, which was where Lord Mountbatten lived, and the details and some of the pictures. And you can even go directly to the actual files that were made. I think we're the first ones to ever post, as far as I know, the actual files that were filled out on the reports of the UFO, where you can see the witness testimony and you could see Lord Mountbatten's statement on the whole incident. So this is kind of exciting, and we've got pictures and stuff like that. So you can find out more about what the royals really do believe when it comes to UFOs. Some people were saying he had his own sighting, but that has not been confirmed. And at least Mountbatten never shared with anybody any particular sighting that he had, although I know there's at least one claim out there that he had said he had seen something, but that had never been confirmed. But Antonio's going to write a part 2 sometime in the near future. He's hard at work on the next issue of the magazine, so it may be a few days, but we'll have that up, and of course look for that because it's going to be exciting, ladies and gentlemen. Our website always is. And speaking of exciting, we've got Don Schmitt. So let's go ahead and listen to our Don Schmitt interview. This is great stuff. All right, Don, are you
I am here, Alejandro. Good to be back with you.
Yes, it's great to have you again. It's funny because I just listened to a bit of the show. I had you on like a year ago, or when we got back from Mexico, and I was
back
extremely
from Mexico
sick.
City, yes.
So, and it's kind of funny because I'm stuttering, and it just reminded me of what I felt like at that
It was
time.
that bad burrito you had. I remember. I know.
I think so. It was scary because what was funny actually during the show is I had the hiccups really bad for like a day and a half, and apparently that's really dangerous if you have hiccups for more than 3 days. So I was worried, and I drank a pop, and I was really worried, and for some reason, during the show, when I interviewed you, I was able to not hiccup. But as soon as the show was over, I started hiccuping again, and for like 24 hours, and I had to go to the doctor, and they gave me something that worked. But
and you are correct. I recall you were totally composed. I did not hear, I know you had told me ahead of time not feeling well.
Yeah.
And we even joked about it. But the fact that immediately after the show that I'm glad you took medical action and that it was nothing serious.
I was pretty embarrassed because there were at least some more names and stuff I couldn't recall, but you were very gracious and you remembered the names, and it all worked out.
Yes, it did. Very
all
pleased.
right, so we have a lot to talk about. And the first thing I want to talk about is during and I'm not sure how you even pulled this off, if you bilocated or what, but during the UFO Congress, which you were at, and you were wonderful, and we're getting comments about how the people there loved it.
Thank you.
But somehow the Louis Farrakhan was also having a conference, and he had a UFO portion, and you were at both conferences at the same time.
At the same time, can you imagine that?
Yeah.
First of all, I expressed reluctance for leaving Phoenix and certainly being part of this other conference hosted by the Minister Farrakhan, almost up to about 4 days before I left for Phoenix. And I kept reminding them that, I had a contract in Phoenix. I was obligated to speak there. That was certainly priority one. And they kept assuring me that, well, no, we're just going to pull you away for just one afternoon. And I kept coming back to, well, what if the weather is a factor? We're talking here, March.
Right.
And what if I can't get back from Chicago? What if there's a delay and just a week before there had been a shutdown at O'Hare Airport?
Wow.
And we had to wait until we saw that the weather did not appear or would not be a factor. There was a forecast of some flurries, possible light snow. But nonetheless, it was a last-minute thing. I had not committed to it until just the week before. And then I had other conditions that there could be nothing religious about it and nothing political, that it was strictly going to be UFOs. And after I had all of those assurances, would I finally, even agree? And true to their word, that's precisely what did happen, what did take place.
Well, yeah, I was worried because I knew Jaime was going to be there. We were going to try to do a live broadcast of Jaime. That didn't work out because he was so busy. And I was worried, too, because, around a decade ago, I was watching Nightline, Ted Koppel?
Yes, of course.
And Farrakhan was on, and I watched it because, I'm a news hound, and I get really interested, especially in the race relations type of stuff. I was involved with that kind of thing as a kid.
It's affecting all of us today, and rightly so, yes.
And he was actually well-spoken, and the interview was very impressive, actually, especially because I've heard some of the more negative rhetoric that he's had. But then at the end, he's like, I got to tell you one more thing. And he's like, okay, what do you have to say? And he says, there's a UFO, a giant mothership over the ocean, and it's about to come and destroy the white world for all of their crimes and corruption. And it was, so I was like,
You were
obviously
blown away
just
by
like
that, and
everybody watching Ted Koppel, we're all pretty blown away by that.
And
it was the
anyone
last
within
minute.
the UFO community were thinking, oh, yes, that's all we need.
Yeah.
I mean, someone to make such a pronouncement
Yeah.
and use it mostly as just race baiting
Yeah.
in the sense that, it's anti-Semitic, it's anti-Gentile as far as the idea that, that even the aliens had it in for us.
Right.
He was most gracious to us. We met with him for a full hour and a half.
Wow.
Before that afternoon. Very soft-spoken, totally supportive in our work. He kept referring to us as being heroic and pioneers in the forefront of uncovering, this mystery, this phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
He kept referring to the wheel, which is the word they use in describing UFOs, flying saucers, that sort, and explained to us that this is something that is taught, something that is generally accepted within the Muslim community, and so I did feel a bit outnumbered. We spoke in a room of 5,000 people.
Wow.
An audience of 5,000 people, and in the overflow room was another 4,000. And I guess what helped was the fact that I had a Jewish individual, being that of Dr. Roger Lear, sitting next to me at the dais. And a couple of times, as we sat there, he said to me, he asked me, "Don, do you think we're safe up here?" and again, they treated us like rock stars.
Great.
From beginning till end. And then,
so how? Go ahead.
And then with Stan Friedman, and even his name, Friedman, also very Jewish. He provided a pre-recorded tape statement that was used at the close of the Roswell, or I should say the UFO portion of the conference that afternoon. And there too, the audience applauded.
Great.
When I spoke and I asked the attending people how many have heard of Roswell, well over 90% of the people raised their hands.
Wow.
And then applauded. So
we recorded that Friedman piece on my laptop in our little office room at the conference, because he, of course, was at the Congress also.
Yes. And I figured it came down to some of your people, some of your production people right there, assisting the people in Chicago to get that done so they could actually present it as a final statement. But again, after all was said and done, we were also informed that it was viewed, as it was streamed online, by almost 100 million people.
Holy moly, probably all
around
over the
world.
world. I know he has
around the
connections
world.
all over the world.
And that's what it finally came down to, the fact that for about 3 hours we had an opportunity to present our best case, our day in court, as far as our UFO research, to 100 million people.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't have had such an opportunity before. And given the stakes, given the idea that we're all hoping that disclosure someday will be at hand, that we may have influenced at least some world leaders into accepting and believing the fact that, yes, maybe we're not being told the truth about this phenomenon. Maybe there is something more to it than what the heads of state in such countries as our own United States are withholding the truth, are not disclosing the true nature of the phenomenon. So anytime I have an opportunity to speak before someone else beyond the choir, so to speak, I feel that if we are true to our own nature, that we're going to present it to the skeptics. We're going to present it to other religions. We're going to present it to other peoples, because if they provide us with the opportunity,
right,
then what do we prove by only sharing it with like-minded individuals?
Yeah, those are all good points, because I thought, wow, because it's such a controversial figure and things like that, what would I do? But when you have the opportunity to reach so many people, you kind of got to take it. And it's a bit of a gamble, because you don't know if he'll maybe take what you're saying and spin it. But that didn't happen, which is great.
And I had, back in Phoenix the next afternoon after I had presented as far as my paper.
Well, how did you do that? You presented? So you went to Chicago first,
I went
presented,
to Chicago,
then came to Phoenix.
Saturday afternoon, and right from there I missed their evening banquet. I didn't have a thing to eat, and I had to rush right back to O'Hare.
Oh, man, and I had some good jokes.
At the gate in a light snow, and I'm wondering, why aren't we backing off? Come on, don't tell me they're going to delay this flight or they're going to cancel it because of snow. And without an announcement, and a flight attendant finally walked by, and I asked, I said, is there a problem? And she said, well, we haven't been given the okay to back off from the gate. Finally, the pilot comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the delay, but we're going to have to de-ice. And we hope to, take off within an hour.
Wow.
All I'm thinking is, even if it takes till tomorrow morning, just get me back to Phoenix.
Yeah.
And what happens when I arrive back in Phoenix? It's a cold, blustery rain. And it's like, can I get away from this stuff?
Yeah. Well, it was a beautiful morning that Sunday.
It was a beautiful morning, and then I had two sisters of the Islam faith come up to my table after my talk, and they informed me that they had seen the Chicago conference online. Wow. And that was the reason they came to the conference in Phoenix.
Holy moly.
So we attracted, again, some additional people, some people who would not have even given it a second thought. Mm-hmm. But because they were so impressed that there was, and they weren't even aware that there was a legitimate UFO investigation, ongoing at that very time, and that there was a conference right in their very city.
Wow.
And they assured me that next year they were going to spread the word, and that it may generate 100 extra people for all we know.
Yeah, yeah. How cool! That's great. And
so you see,
there's
we
a testament
see how that works. We see how that works. So.
Yep, there's a testament to it was the right decision. So who all was there? You were there. Friedman had the video. Jaime Maussan was there. Roger Lear.
AJ
Javard. Oh yeah, he was at our conference.
Right.
He flew out there too.
And there was the couple from Italy. I can't think of their name right now. Who've had the multiple ongoing experiences.
Oh, Urzi.
Yes.
Antonio Urzi.
And there was a doctor who works with Roger Lear, who was also there to confirm at least some of the testing on some of the alleged implants that he has retrieved through some of his surgeries. Mm-hmm. And that was basically it.
Wow. Yeah, how funny, because we also were contending with that weekend. Well, some of our speakers were. There was an event for Battle LA, the movie.
Yes.
And I don't know if they asked you to be a part of that, but some of our speakers were in LA, part of this panel and opening for their movie, and they were flying back and forth between Phoenix and LA for this. I think Friedman was part of that too, and Colonel Halt was part of that, I know.
Charles Halt, right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it does demonstrate, though, that we've had some very lean years in the past where if there were just 2 or 3 conferences anywhere.
Mhm.
That was about it. But just imagine the thought that you're conflicting. I mean, just one weekend there are 3 different events going on.
Yeah.
All touching, all spreading the information about the very phenomenon that we keep crying out. Just listen to the information. Just examine the record. Look at the testimony. Look at the documentation. It's there if one just takes the time to look at it.
Yeah.
And that's all we're asking anyone.
Yeah. And then just a few weeks before, this gigantic Saudi Arabian business forum, which had some of our speakers there too. They had Nick Pope, Stan Friedman.
Well, Stan Friedman again,
Jacques
and
Vallée.
Jacques Vallée, absolutely.
Yeah. So
and in the
you're
company of the President Bill Clinton, for example, who, as we know himself, has a very definitive interest in the subject of UFOs, and most specifically Roswell.
You know what? That's a great topic, and I haven't asked you about that. So maybe let's segue into that.
Sure.
Clinton had an interest in Roswell, and it seems like possibly, and we'll see if you agree with this, that because of Clinton's inquiries and interest, we got these Air Force reports too, which were to try to quench his interest.
Well, when we came out with our first book in 1990, Kevin Rando and I, UFO Crash at Roswell, and we had already been approached by producer, writer Paul Davids for purchasing or optioning the rights to the book. And as I'm sure most of your audience knows, it then would lead to the Golden Globe nominated Best TV Motion Picture, Roswell, which we're still very proud of. Well, anyway, we were hoping to have a private screening of the movie at the White House, just as Spielberg had with the movie E.T. during the Reagan administration. And up until about a week before, that is exactly what was scheduled, until someone else, someone outside of the Oval Office, decided that it was not about to happen, that someone either at the Pentagon or someone else felt that it was too controversial. Well, it didn't stop us from providing something else for the president, at least on the subject. And it's a topic, and you probably have heard me mention this before, but the fact that Roswell is mentioned in the Ken Starr report on the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal. And when the grand jury subpoenaed the book that Lewinsky had given Clinton as a Christmas present, when they retrieved it from his private study, they found the book sandwiched between 2 other books. One was a book on Winston Churchill, and the other was an autographed copy to the president of our book, UFO Crash at Roswell. So therein began, I'd like to believe, his interest, or increased or intensified his interest in the subject. And then as the late Congressman Stephen Schiff also made inquiries to the White House and to the then Secretary of Defense, Les Aspin, as to the opening of the Roswell files. And as Newsweek magazine very aptly described as the preemptive strike on the part of the Air Force when they came out in September of 1994 with their third official explanation, that being their new theory, that being the same type of weather balloon device, but that it was part of a top-secret project back in 1947 called Mogul. The theory being that if the Soviets were to detonate their own atomic bomb, that we would pick up the shock wave. Well, I understand right now that the Mogulists are now taking credit once again that it was also Mogul that even picked up that first detonation of an atomic bomb by the Soviet Union in August of 1949. Well, if you look at the historic record, well, sorry, Mogul friends, it was not. Because if Mogul would have been successful, we should have picked up the shock wave within hours or at least a day or two. Nonetheless, according to the Air Force, we didn't even know the Soviets had detonated an atomic bomb until almost 3 weeks later, because we picked up a higher reading of radiation in the upper atmosphere. So Mogul had nothing to do with it. So, sorry, Mogul failed miserably. So, not only wasn't it the explanation of what happened at Roswell, it couldn't even do the job it was assigned to do. So, but nonetheless, getting back to even President Clinton, we believe, and as you mentioned, that one of the reasons that they so quickly skirted the issue, that being the Air Force, and they tried to downplay the president's growing curiosity on the subject, was by coming out with this new theory, this new explanation, and that being Project Mogul. And most people within the media to this day, well, wasn't it Project Mogul? Didn't the Air Force come out with the official explanation back in the 90s explaining this all away? Well, yeah, they tried to, but they are still unable to provide a single witness to that effect. It still remains a theory. None of the witnesses support that theory. None of the witnesses describe a balloon of any sort, and as of April 2011, they are still batting zero, and we to date have spoken to over 600 people that claim that the flying saucer explanation was the correct one.
Well, I always like, too, is Clinton's comments, because he's commented a couple times on this whole affair, and that, I asked the Air Force about that whole Roswell thing, and they told me it was just a balloon. But he always has the caveat.
Yes.
Yes. And I know in Hong Kong it was, but I wouldn't be the first president that career bureaucrats have probably held information from or lied to.
That's correct. I've seen that very interview that he did. It's probably one of the more recent, probably the most recent comment. And the thing is, if you think back to it, he appeared to be a bit blindsided, that he was caught off guard.
Yeah.
When the reporter even brought up the subject, and he was a bit exasperated by it. Like, you can ask me anything but that.
Right.
But then it was also Clinton who, working the crowd in Dublin, Ireland, as you remember,
right,
actually brought up a letter he had received from a young boy from Ireland about when are they going to tell us the truth about Roswell. And he lamented that the problem then as well, that they tell me it was a weather balloon, but frankly, I don't know what it was. They won't tell me.
Yeah.
So, and that, as we know, has been the case with, I believe, all the presidents, from Truman, who served in that capacity back at the time of the incident in 1947, right up to the present, that the president is not, albeit commander-in-chief, is not looked at as being within the military loop, that they're walking the street. They're a civilian in 4 to 8 years. So they obviously are in a position of need to know. And for whatever reason, the subject of UFOs is not considered within their purview.
Another amazing thing during this period of time was when the 50th anniversary happened for Roswell and the parade and everything out in Roswell. And Time magazine had a special issue on Roswell with that famous alien picture on the cover.
Cover story, yes.
This is amazing. A poll that they did at the time, and their poll said 80% of Americans think that the government at that time was hiding knowledge of ET life. And I don't know that that number has ever reached as high on some of these bigger official polls as it did at that time.
Well, and you had mentioned ABC Nightline with Ted Koppel.
Mm-hmm.
On the 50th anniversary, when they focused on the topic of Roswell, and they had a call-in survey, which they announced results the very next evening, it was 83%.
Wow.
So it was in that same ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
So as we've been discussing, President Bill Clinton, we could also add former President Jimmy Carter. We've mentioned the late Congressman Stephen Schiff. We could also mention the late Senator, former presidential candidate, former Brigadier General Barry Goldwater.
Mm-hmm.
And we could also mention the former governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel I'm in very good company because they would all voice and express their concern that they could not get the answers about what really happened in Roswell in 1947. That none of them were able to get to the bottom of what actually crashed back at that time. So we're talking right up to the Oval Office. So for any reporter to be so smug as to say, the government is speaking out of both sides of their mouths.
Right.
The Pentagon tells us one thing, but then the president says, I can't get the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, doesn't that, define the very term cover-up?
Right.
If the president can't get the answers, I guess it is still being covered up.
Right.
That's all we have. That's all we are acknowledging. And if that's the case, our investigation continues till we come to a final resolution.
Yeah, lately, probably just because I've been talking with people about various crash cases and stuff like that. The Frank Scully has come up quite a bit, who was the genesis.
FBI memo, yes.
Right. Well, and he was the genesis of a lot of different, and with the HODL memo, of a lot of the crash cases and crash rumors. But that's what's great about Roswell, because there's a lot of doubt shed on Frank Scully, which I've reviewed on the show. I had James Mosley on. We talked about that last week.
Mm-hmm.
But Roswell's not like that. Roswell became popular much later, and the guy who really the first witness to come forward was the military intelligence, Air Force intelligence officer who saw the material.
Precisely. Major Jesse Marcel. And if we're talking about another important factor about Roswell is this was the first atomic strike or bomb wing in the world at that time. Mm-hmm. It was a composite squadron, the 509th Bomb Group. They were selected as this composite squadron. They were the best officers, the best pilots, best crewmen, doctors, nurses. And Jesse Marcel, being the head of intelligence, made him the number one intelligence officer in the United States military at that time. And for him, 30 years after the fact, he was dying of emphysema at the time. And having been the patsy, the fall guy, who was ordered to pose with the substituted weather balloon wreckage in General Ramey's office as they were coming up with explanation number 2. And as Jess was always told, just be a good soldier, Jesse. It's all going to come out in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years later. And at the time he's finally, his days are dwindling as he's dying of his disease, and he finally breaks his oath of secrecy. And as you mentioned, he describes how I held it right in my hands. In being familiar with all materials, both domestic and foreign, this was nothing made on this earth. Mm-hmm. Well, what else do we need to hear? It's no different than the late Brigadier General Thomas Jefferson DuBose, who was also part of that press conference, who was also photographed with his boss, General Ramey, in 2 of the shots, testifying and signing an affidavit before he died that they were the ones who substituted the weather balloon for the actual material.
Right.
DuBose stated the balloon part of it was a hoax.
Yeah.
So we have 2 high-ranking officers who were party to the official cover-up. And it doesn't matter that they become whistleblowers, that they come clean, that they sign affidavits, that they go on camera and they state in front of the entire world it was not a weather balloon. It was something not made on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it still isn't enough. It still isn't enough for
Right.
the press to say,
Yeah.
maybe we need to look into this, because if we're wrong, if these witnesses are right, we're talking about the biggest story of the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
And we can hardly go wrong trying to at least get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. One question I don't think I've asked you about Roswell, which I find fascinating, is, and not a lot of people realize this these days, and I touched on it earlier, was that even though Roswell happened in 47, a press release went out, news stories went out. Of course, then within a day, another press release comes out saying, oh, it was a mistake, it wasn't real, and then it goes quiet.
Yes.
And nobody, after intensive UFO investigations in the 50s and the 60s, especially with NICAP and APRO and all of these people looking into UFOs, they never touched on Roswell. It didn't come out until the 80s.
Because, as just described in the situation of Jesse Marcel,
Mm-hmm.
for all of the military involved as well as the civilians involved. The military, DuBose told us, for example, that right after the balloon press conference, that his boss, General Ramey, took him aside and said, I don't want to hear you ever bring this up again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the common scenario described to us over and over again, that they were told it was a non-event, they were told it didn't happen, they were told not to ever bring it up again, and they were sworn to secrecy. And within the military, when you sign a non-disclosure as you complete your tenure of service, or as we've had described, that they were taken into rooms, and they were in groups of 8 to 12 people, and they were told verbally that if you want to wind up in Leavenworth, if you want to lose your pensions, if you want to wind up in jail for the rest of your life, you better never bring this up again.
Yeah.
And with civilians, as you know, they had to resort to physical threats.
Mm-hmm.
They had to threaten parents. They had to threaten parents with the deaths of their children if they should ever speak about this again. And again, demonstrating the extreme measures that were resorted to by the authorities just to ensure the cooperation of the witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what becomes so silly, that now after going on 64 years, that we still have civilian people tell us that they still feel threatened, they still feel intimidated, that they still get late-night phone calls reminding them about maintaining their silence, about, again, as something as mundane, as conventional as a weather balloon. I don't care if it was top secret back in 1947. Officially, it was declassified in the 70s, but it was the project. The materials, I can't emphasize this enough, were still very conventional. It was still neoprene rubber, weather balloons, and reflective foil, and wooden sticks, and masking tape and string. That's all it was. And the notion that the very people in charge of the atomic bomb would not have been able to identify something that prosaic, something that conventional, and to the very deathbeds, that they still swear that it was the very first press release which you mentioned, the actual acknowledgement that they had captured a flying saucer, was still the correct one. And that's what makes Roswell so important. And to me, it's what still makes it the granddaddy of all UFO cases.
Yeah.
Because it is a matter of historic fact. It was reported to the press. They put out that press release that they had indeed captured a flying saucer.
Which they wouldn't put out lightly. I mean, they would not. I mean, that's a very serious thing, and they realized that at the time, that this is the Air Force saying we captured a flying disc. So, you know, it wasn't a flip type of, oh, yeah, put out, you know, fun thing. It was, they believed that they had captured something.
That's correct. That is correct. And it was all prearranged. It was all staged in the sense that they had the material in hand. In fact, Washington even had the material for a full day and a half before they put out the press release.
Wow.
And they needed, in fact, they were forced to put out that very pronouncement because it had leaked out to the press that you had so many people already speaking about the reality of the nature that they had to admit it. They had to create the straw man, and then they had to tear it down. They had to first acknowledge that they had captured something of an unusual nature. And then within 5 hours, well, we're sorry for the all the misunderstanding, but it is nothing more than this weather balloon with this radar reflector kite. That's what confused the very people who were in charge of the atomic bomb. And it worked. As you said, for weeks leading up to Roswell, the skies were full of flying saucers. The modern age of ufology had started. And then immediately after Roswell, the reports dropped down to practically nothing. They not only had squelched Roswell, but the very phenomenon itself.
But you get a real sense
reports
when
continued. The sightings continued.
Yeah. When you listen to the radio broadcast back then, because the guy says, now maybe we finally have an answer to this saucer question that has been, you know,
plaguing as far as the airwaves for weeks.
Right. So you can tell from those radio broadcasts, because some people make the assumption that it wasn't a big deal back then, but people were seeing a lot of stuff back then.
Oh, any one of your listeners can go to the public libraries and pull out all the microfilm and pull out all of the newspapers from that last week of June, that first week of July. And I think any one of them would be amazed at the banner headlines day after day about the flying discs, the flying saucers, and all the attempted scrambles and all the attempts by our own military in trying to come to answers as to what was invading our airspace back then. We were clearly dealing with someone else's hardware. This wasn't being treated as mass hysteria or as astronomical or as meteorological in nature. We were clearly dealing with someone else's aircraft. Why else were we trying to bring one down? Why else were pilots mounting cameras, for example, on their aircraft, their P-51 Mustangs, for example, trying to at least capture something on film? They were taking it very seriously. And as you mentioned, right after Roswell, they went into a full-scale effort to not only explain away Roswell, but all of the UFO reports at that time. They attempted to demonstrate that they were all nothing more than weather balloons. And the problem with that is, yes, many UFO sightings, even in Project Blue Book, for the 20 years after Roswell, were explained as weather balloons. But that's at 10,000 feet. There are a lot of conventional aircraft that at high altitude can look unusual at that distance. But when it's on the ground in front of you, as in the case of Roswell, when, as Major Jesse Marcel said, I held it in my hand.
Right.
If you can't recognize rubber and wood and foil at that point, I guess you need a different job. You need to get out of the military in a hurry, let alone be in charge of the atomic bomb.
Yeah. What I found interesting, too, when you talked about the secrecy and just telling the Air Force officers to shut up, how effective that was. When I first interviewed Marcel Jr., I asked him about the movie you talked about, the Showtime movie, and how in the movie, the main character, Jesse Marcel's really upset that they're setting him up and everything. And he said his dad really wasn't upset. His dad followed orders. If they said, we got to tell people it's a balloon, we got to tell people it's a balloon. It's just that's business. I do what I'm told. And it wasn't until later in his life.
That's correct. That's correct.
Like you had mentioned, that he was finally, hey, you guys told us to shut up and that the secret would come out eventually, and I'm almost, I'm in my last days and nobody's told anybody anything, and I think people got to know.
The only two people that expressed Marcel's frustration upon returning back to Roswell after the weather balloon press conference were two other people who shared an adjoining office in intelligence. And that was Captain Sheridan Cabot and his non-commissioned officer, Master Sergeant Louis Rickett, who were both counterintelligence at that time. And both of them described how Marcel came into Cabot's office the very next morning, demanding to see the report, what had transpired during his absence from Roswell while he was away at Fort Worth for this weather balloon press conference. And Rickett offered to leave the room, and Cabot said, no, you can stay. So he observed the exact exchange that I'm about to relate. And Cabot responded to Marcel, I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing happened while you were gone. And Marcel said, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You were out at that ranch with me. And Marcel was then told by Cabot, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can take it up with Washington. I'm taking my orders from Washington. And Marcel reminded Cabot, my God, man, I outrank you. I'm ordering you to tell me what happened. And Cabot again said, I'm sorry, Jess. Take it up with Washington. I take my orders from them.
Wow, and Cabot was, I think, the only person in the movie who didn't allow you to use his name, I guess, huh?
That is, well, we changed his name, and we also changed the name of the mortician, Glenn Dennis, from the Ballard Funeral Home. And we changed it as a variation on the executive producer, Paul David's name. We changed it to Paul Davies.
Who's now a famous astrobiologist.
That is correct. Who at the time we weren't aware of that, but so we changed two names. So you had Cabot was changed to Carson in the movie, and Glenn Dennis was changed to Davies.
Now, one aspect of the movie, just because we're running out of time, I want to get to this because in the magazine that should be out on the bookstores, I think, right now or very soon, it's our special Roswell issue for June and July. You wrote an article on the surviving alien, and in the movie, of course, that's portrayed that you have a lot of witnesses that have told you that one of the beings from the crash survived.
Yes, and in some accounts, they describe that it was lying on the ground when they first arrived. Others describe when arriving later that they saw it walking. We have eyewitnesses who describe it being carried on a stretcher into P3, Building 84, the B-29 hangar at the base at Roswell. We have others describing it on a gurney in the base hospital where it moved. And we also, in this article, I describe firsthand eyewitness testimony who describe taking the bodies over from the hangar to the hospital, and then a sheet being pulled accidentally away, and seeing that one of them indeed was alive, that the head turned and the eyes opened. And that particular witness, who we describe in the article, is still emotionally affected by what he saw. It's still something that creates nightmares. He's still, according to his wife, that he'll bolt up there in the middle of the night, and he still can't get the face out of his mind after all these years, and he becomes very emotional when he talks about it.
Wow.
So it had a profound effect on not only him but the other people, because so many describe the childlike characteristics of
Are
the
the
body.
descriptions, all similar, like the shape and sizes that they describe? What is it that they describe? The color of the skin, stuff like that, and are they similar?
The ashen gray color of the skin, the larger disproportionate head to the rest of the body, the diminutive features, the slight nose, slight ears, the thin slit opening for the mouth, the larger almond-shaped eyes, but 3.5 to 4 feet in height, the smaller, more spindly body, but again, the childlike qualities that even for those in death, that they seem so serene, so peaceful, even in death.
Wow. So the movie, the alien in the movie, is that pretty accurate?
No. In fact, we insisted that even with the special effects people, that the depiction of the bodies would not be as described by the witnesses. We did not want to lead or potentially contaminate any possible witnesses. Any witness that would come forward thereafter and describe the appearance from the movie, we'd know them not to be legitimate as a result.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's interesting. So, in the movie, the alien is taken, and then that is when it goes into this kind of the speculation parts of the possible MJ-12 type of meetings.
The Oversight Committee, yes.
Forrestal and all of that. Do you have any witness testimony that tells you what happened to that creature?
Well, the latest observation of a survivor beyond Roswell would be the account of Marion Magruder, who was a full bird colonel, and before he died in 1995, he described while he was part of the War College, the class of 47-48, that they were on assignment in April, and in fact we have the documents that prove he was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for an undisclosed mission, April of 1948. And before he would pass away, he would describe independently to his 5 sons that he, as well as the other members, the other classmates, all high-ranking officers, all lieutenant colonels and colonels present in the room when they were allowed to witness the survivor, they were told was recovered from Roswell just that July of 1947, just that summer before. That's the last account we have of a survivor. Beyond that, we have rumors, we have speculation. Some accounts describe how it died shortly thereafter, others that it lived into the 50s, some beyond that. But the actual last eyewitness testimony we have is April of 1948.
Gotcha. Wow. Interesting. Now, just so people know, and we'll start to talk about the conference in Kingman in a minute, but also at Roswell, the famous Roswell anniversary event that happens every year, at least into the 50th, I think, is July 1st to the 4th. There's a Roswell Museum downtown, a lot going on. They can see you and others speak, so people have to book their hotel rooms right now if they want to check this out because they go quickly. But you'll be there once again at the UFO Museum, which you're part of the board. Is that correct?
Well, I'm actually an advisor to the board. I was originally on the board, and I guess I had a promotion because I now tell the board what to do.
Nice.
In fact, Stanton Friedman and I serve in that capacity.
Okay.
There was one time where we even requested the board to ask for the resignation of their own president.
Wow.
And they did comply. So
wow.
I guess that's wielding a pretty big sword. But
Yeah.
but more importantly, the festival so often serves as an opportunity for not only the public but also for witnesses to provide us with leads, with information that we're able to follow up on and continue our proactive investigation of the Roswell case. And the same opportunity will present itself next weekend in Kingman, Arizona, when I've already, with numerous media outlets, I've asked for any potential witnesses with any information, with any rumors, any little tidbits of information pertaining to the alleged crash of a UFO in Kingman, Arizona in 1953, that with this conference, that with my being in town presenting a paper, that they may possibly come forward. And I, in turn, would turn it over to people in Arizona, such as the good people at Open Minds magazine, for example, to follow up on. I'm in Wisconsin, so it would be something that others would have to follow any such potential leads. But the conference next weekend hopefully might provide such new eyewitness testimony and some further follow-up to continue a renewed investigation on this alleged crash that happened back in 1953.
Now, this is one that this is a Scully one also, right?
No, it isn't.
It has its genesis. I can't remember right now where Kingman
It actually started with the anonymous testimony to researcher investigator, longtime MUFON investigator Ray Fowler.
Right.
And his anonymous witness, who went by the name of Fritz Werner, and provided firsthand testimony of an alleged crash that happened outside of Kingman in August of 1953. Now, the last time I was in Kingman was in 1995, and albeit I was only there for a weekend, no witnesses. I was unable to find or have anyone come up with so much as a third-hand witness.
Yeah.
But in recent years, the story now, and I call it a story because at the moment that's all it is, that a few other civilian witnesses have come forward. In fact, supposedly there's even eyewitness testimony as to the possible ranch, the property that this took place. So my hope is that enough new information may be pieced together to provide some new information for follow-up, and something may develop. The great thing about Roswell is, again, we come back to the fact that they put out that press release, that there are names, that there were photographs, that there were people named associated with the incident back in the newspapers at that time. So we had a paper trail to follow up on. With Kingman, there is no paper trail. It's going to require people to actually step forward and to provide, even again, the slightest rumor of information that may initiate some follow-up investigation.
Yeah, I know last time I went to write on this story, I kind of gave up because I couldn't come up with very much to even write about so far on Kingman. But it's something that is still so kind of pervasive. People talk about Kingman a lot.
And yet if one accepts Roswell, as I am 99% convinced that it did happen, I then have to accept the possibility that there were other Roswells. That there were other crashes. I just can't. Otherwise, it becomes self-serving. And I have colleagues who, well, yes, Roswell, I accept Roswell, but nothing else happened. Well, that's faulty reasoning. That's a false premise on the face of it. It's no different than I've had colleagues who are very pro UFO when it comes to abduction research. But they will then say, but I can't accept that Roswell, was a legitimate case. Well, I would remind them, as I have in the past, you can accept the egg, but you can't accept the chicken. That's false. That's a faulty scientific approach to this, and I do not accept that.
Yeah. Well, it ought to be a fun conference. That's May 6th to May 9th. People can go to ArizonaUFOsightings.com. That's ArizonaUFOsightings.com. That's where you can go to register. 6th to the 9th. It ought to be fun. You'll be there. Some very interesting speakers that I know fairly well. Michael Schratt and Antonio Huneas from Open Minds will be there.
That is correct, and
so
look forward to always seeing them personally, yes.
Strong presence there. If you have any issues with the way that we laid out your story on Roswell, you can bring that up with Antonio. Take that out all on him. And then, Len Kasten, who's a local author, a really nice guy. He'll be there. Atlantis Rising is what he writes for.
Yes, that is correct, yes.
So that ought to be a lot of fun.
Looking forward to it, and again, especially looking forward to the possibility that being right there in the heart of one of the legendary UFO stories that supposedly took place, let's again see if there's some actual eyewitness information still available. Just like Roswell, we raced with The Undertaker, and Kingman is just 5 years younger in that regard.
Right.
So let's hope someone comes forward.
Cool. So you're going to have a busy and fun summer, it sounds like.
And again, continuing every day we work on the Roswell incident. We have more and more testimony. We have a long list of witnesses that we still have in our active files that we need to conduct further and future interviews with. And again, I assure your listeners, no one is testifying that this was a balloon or anything else conventional. The deathbed testimonies, as they continue to grow in intensity, are all talking about the recovery of the flying saucer, of the little men, of the little people. Yeah. And as one of them, and I keep pointing this out, said to us, and I ended my talk in Phoenix just a month ago, as he stated, they sure weren't from Texas.
Right. And if there are any Roswell skeptics out there who have not read your books, then really you can't finish basing your opinion until you do that. RoswellInvestigator.com is your website.
That is correct. And
Roswell
the book is
Investigator.
Witness to Roswell, yes.
Yep. Great. Well, I think that's everything. Thank you so much for being on the show again. Of course, it's been fun as always.
My pleasure, Alejandro. Look forward to seeing you soon. Hope you're going to be in Roswell with us again, and look forward to the conference in Kingman as well.
Roswell. I usually sometimes dread going out there because it's so hot on the 4th of July weekend when they have their festival. But now that I live in Arizona, that's nothing. So it's no big deal. But it is a lot of fun, so you guys can check it out. You got to remember, though, there's a lot of course, fun and silliness at Roswell. It's not all completely serious stuff. But when you come into the UFO Museum, you meet Don. You can tell Don is a very serious, Stan Friedman, very serious people there. Now, they're witty and fun, too, but, of course, they're very serious about their research. And they're always in the museum 24/7 and doing multiple talks a day there. So come check us out at the UFO Museum in Roswell. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest, and that is David Eckhart. I'm 95% sure that we'll have him. But if you watch Fact or Faked, you know him. He's the guy who had some alleged videos of aliens in his house and says him and his wife have visitations. And so this is going to be a lot of fun talking to him because just like with Fact or Faked, it was more about him being a credible person. And they thought, man, I don't know that this guy is making this stuff up. He seems like he's the real dealio. So we will talk to him about his videos and his experiences, and that will be a lot of fun. I'm very interested in speaking with him, and he seems like a really nice guy. So this should be a great show. Send us any messages or questions you may have. Anyway, we are out of time. Thank you for listening to Open Minds Radio, and don't forget to visit openminds.tv for more UFO news. Talk to you next week.